In today's video, we're going to be discussing a blockbuster trade that almost happened but was ultimately rejected. Plus, we have lots of news from the NHL waiver wire, including some very interesting names. We had the first regular season game over in Europe today, plus some injury updates and more. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and rumors to take a look at today. First up, we have a bunch more news from the NHL waiver wire. There was once again no claims made for the players put on waivers yesterday, but we do have another large group going on waivers today, and this group certainly has a lot more interesting, more established players. As I mentioned, the further into this we go, before the regular season starts, we're going to see some more prominent names, more experience, and there could end up resulting in some more waiver claims. So let's get started going through these list of players. The Dallas Stars have placed goaltender Anton Khudobin on waivers. I mentioned him recently, talking about some Dallas Stars trade chatter. Of course, after they signed Robertson, especially that they might be looking to get a little extra cap flexibility with Robertson's contract on the books. They had around, I think it was 80 or 85,000 in cap space, which isn't much. You can't really do much of anything with that, but at least they were compliant. But I said they might want a little bit more breathing room, and it didn't make sense to carry three goalies. I figured they were going to go with Auger and Scott Wedgwood, so Khudobin would either be traded or demoted through the waiver wire if possible. And of course, they probably weren't able to find a trade. This year, if a contract gets buried in the minors, it can be give the team cap relief upwards of $1.125 million. So if it's more than that, they get that much relief. If it's that amount or less, then they'll get the full amount covered. So, of course, Khudobin, I think, is making 3.3 or something like that. So they'd still have a cap charge of like 2.2, but it frees up about $1.1 million in space. So that's a little bit easier to deal with than 85,000. So we'll see what happens on Anton Khudobin. The Carolina Hurricanes surprisingly placed forward Jordan Martinook on waivers as well. So clearly they're going to go with somebody different on their bottom six than Martinook. He's been a pretty consistent mainstay there for the last few years. So we'll see if he gets picked up. The Edmonton Oilers have a couple interesting players, including Dmitry Samorukov on defense, and recently signed forward Mattias Janmark. So Janmark looks like he could be a victim of the cap, and it could be a case of being outplayed, but I think it's probably a bit of both, to be honest. We know Dylan Holloway has been outstanding this preseason and has likely played his way onto this team, but also Dylan Holloway's ELC will help with the cap as well. I mentioned some players like him could find themselves on the roster because of that. Of course, sounds like Derek Ryan, who was battling with Janmark probably for that one of the last forward spots, likely is going to be making the roster, while Janmark will either be claimed or clear and go to the minors. So we'll see what happens. But the Oilers have a couple interesting names there. The Wild have Stephen Fogarty. The New Jersey Devils have Andreas Johnsson. Now, there's an interesting name. Of course, he was the former Maple Leaf who went to New Jersey a couple of years back. Hasn't really worked out to the point they were hoping, and he's been outplayed by some other younger players. So we'll see what happens with Johnsson. But, an interesting two-way player there. Could be interesting to other teams. Brian Pino from the Devils also on waivers. The Flyers have defenseman Kevin Connaughton and goalie Troy Grosnick on waivers. I'm not sure if either of those would be appealing, but some experience there for sure. The Blues have a few experienced players as well, including Martin Ferk. No big surprise there. Matthew Highmore, who they signed this offseason, and Klim Kostin. Kostin's a player that I wouldn't be shocked if another team took a chance on. He is a player who was a highly drafted player, but probably drafted too high, but for the most part is a pretty rugged, forward. And I think that I could see a team giving him a chance in a bottom six role. So we'll see. He's still fairly young too, but he's been having a hard time getting much of a role with St. Louis over the last few years. And the Vancouver Canucks also placed Justin Dowling on waivers, and the Jets have Jonathan Kovacevic on waivers. So an interesting group of players. Certainly a bunch there that we may not have any claims, but it's possible that between Kostin, Janmark, Johnsson, Martinook, Khudobin, Samorukov, there's some interesting names there for sure, and we'll see tomorrow afternoon if there are any claims, and there are likely going to be a bunch more players as teams continue to make cuts here over the next couple of days as they trim down their rosters to get ready for opening night. Another player's been released from his PTO, and that's the St. Louis Blues releasing Tyler Pitlick. So another one bites the dust there for a chance there. We still have a bunch of players in camp on PTOs, still trying to figure things out, and We'll probably get more clarity on that over the course of the weekend. Of course, as I mentioned as well, we had our first NHL regular season game today. It took place over in Prague and Czechia. Of course, the Nashville Predators battled the San Jose Sharks, and the Preds picked up a 4-1 victory in the global series. So that was looks like a pretty decent game. I did see part of it. Thomas Hertl scored the lone goal for the Sharks in his hometown, so that's obviously nice for him. But unfortunately, they don't pick up the win. The Predators get goals from Kiefer Sherwood, who scored the first goal of the NHL season. Eeli Tolvanen, Nino Niederreiter, and Matt Duchene also getting goals for the Nashville Predators. UC Saros picking up the win between the pipes. So we'll have to wait and see here when the rest of the action gets underway. But that's one game's in the books. It's weird having a regular season game and preseason games all at the same time. But of course, because of scheduling and it being in Europe, it ended up being that way this year. A few updates on injuries. Leafs captain John Tavares may actually be available for opening night now. Of course, there was some talk he was probably going to miss the first 1 to 2 weeks of the season, and it's still not a guarantee that he'll play, but at least he's been upgraded and said he's ahead of schedule, and at least now it's a possibility. He did skate with the team today, seen him having a long chat with Sheldon Keefe, and we'll see. I'm sure they'll be cautious with him. There's no point in rushing back if it means missing a couple of games in order to get things healed up so that he doesn't re-aggravate things and be out longer. Then that's probably a wise move, but we'll see. But certainly he's doing well, which is good news for the Leafs. It sounds like Pierre Engvall could also be available for opening night too, which will obviously be impacting their decisions on who's going to make the roster and who's going to be cut. We're probably going to see a lot of Leaf players on waivers over the course of the weekend, I would imagine. The Vancouver Canucks are dealing with more injury issues. We found out today that defenseman Tyler Myers is out, and he could be out for upwards of a month. It could be as little as 2 weeks, but at least a couple weeks for sure. So he's out. Of course, Tucker Poolman is not, I don't think really can reliably say that he's 100% healthy and will play. Dermott's out. Mikheyev's out. Besser's out. This is not the way they want it to start their season for sure. I'm not sure how many of those guys are going to be ready to go for opening night, but certainly cause for concern for Bruce Boudreau and the Canucks. I know some people are predicting that they're going to take off right where they left off and have a fantastic year, and Bruce will lead the way. And there's others that feel like that are predicting basically that Bruce Boudreau could be the first coach let go, and that the Canucks may be heading for a bit of a setback. So I guess we'll see. The injuries are part of the game and certainly going to play a role here, but obviously not something that you really want to see. The Canadiens are also dealing with a few more injuries as well. Apparently Mike Hoffman is injured. I know some are not overly thrilled with how he's played in recent preseason games, especially on the power play. The Canadiens, like some other teams, have a lot of forwards in camp still, and it'll be interesting to see how they cut things down, because some of it will be injury related, I'm sure. Suzuki was battling another upper body injury of some sort. He didn't travel with the team for their last 2 games to go to Newfoundland and New Brunswick. And then Hoffman, and I think there was another player as well that was out. So they get a lot of injuries in Montreal. Interesting to see who's ready to go on opening night. Now, of course, today for trade rumors, I want to go back because this information just came out from Pierre LeBrun, talking about a little bit more of the backstory and what happened between the Canadiens and the Hurricanes on the whole Jesperi Kotkaniemi offer sheet. Of course, we know the Canadiens are basically the ones who instigated all that by offer sheeting Sebastian Aho. That offer sheet was, in my opinion, terrible. It was never structured to the point where they stood a good chance to get the player, and the Canes matched, and well, the rest is history. He's a Hurricane still today, having a big part of their success. But the Hurricanes decided they wanted to retaliate, so they went after Jesperi Kotkaniemi, and it sounds like they even were some kind to give the Habs a bit of a heads up that that's something that they were considering doing, and they discussed talking trade. But apparently Marc Bergevin was insisting on having Seth Jarvis be the return piece going back the other way. Of course, Jesperi Kotkaniemi was their first rounder in 2018. Jarvis was drafted 2 years later in 2020. A highly touted first round pick, not taken quite as high as Kotkaniemi, but as you can all see, in the couple of years that Jarvis has been in the NHL, he's really progressed and made a name for himself in Carolina, and certainly become a pretty solid member of their top 6. So it's probably a wise move that they didn't trade him. I certainly understand why Marc Bergevin insisted on having him included, but at the same time, it's fair to say that I think, based on what you'd seen out of Kotkaniemi so far, that Montreal wasn't really committed to making him a big part of their plans. I think they were already having concerns. Obviously, you could say what you want about his development, if they had an impact on it, or was it more of the players' fault? But things really weren't materializing. He went straight to the NHL. It was kind of an up and down scenario, but Montreal certainly struggled with some development of a lot of their recently highly touted prospects. That's, on record, that's easy to look back and see. Alex Galchenyuk's a prime example of that. Now, thankfully, their more recent first rounders are doing better, like Cole Caulfield. Obviously a good example of that, but he had his moments before the coaching change. Obviously, Caden Gooley looks really good, but there's a long stretch there for like a decade where the Habs first round picks were just not working out, and a lot of them were, becoming bust early on. Well, obviously, Kotkaniemi, I think it was a little early to call him a bust, but he certainly wasn't the higher end player that we've seen some other players in that draft become. There's also been a lot of talk that Trevor Timmins, of course, who was basically in charge of running the draft for the Canadiens, really wanted Kotkaniemi, but there was a lot of members of that Canadian staff that was pushing for them to take Brady Tkachuk instead, and they chose not to. Of course, Brady goes next to the Ottawa Senators and has become the captain and a huge part of their success, and Kotkaniemi now is in Carolina. So I think it's probably fair to say that had they taken Brady Tkachuk, they would have been a lot more pleased with the results and the outcome, and things might be entirely different in Montreal. It's really difficult to say how things would have worked out, but certainly I understand why the Carolina Hurricanes decided to do this offer sheet. They gave Bergevin a chance. In my opinion, insisting on having Jarvis in that trade probably wasn't a fair trade. At the same time, Kotkaniemi is a highly touted, really high drafted first round pick, and they wanted a comparable first round pick in return. I get that, but it certainly was a steep asking price considering he had a couple years in the league, and certainly wasn't quite living up to the standard that they were hoping for a third overall selection. Obviously, the Carolina Hurricanes come in. They overpay on a one-year offer sheet, which I understood at the time. The contract they then gave him on a long-term deal was a bit of a discount compared to that one-year deal, but it's still too much money, and he's still having difficulty living up to that contract. I still don't completely understand, I should say, the retaliation by the Hurricanes to attack Montreal to do that, because to me, I don't know that it was really worth it. They got the player, they gave up compensation for him, they gave him a contract that so far hasn't worked out. It's early in it though, and obviously they didn't have to give up Jarvis. They also got to keep Kotkaniemi, and I'm sure they're gonna on records probably say that they're thrilled with it and still happy to have him. But I don't know. I think it was a wise move by Montreal to let Kotkaniemi go and take the compensation. It's just unfortunate that they maybe couldn't get something a little better with that compensation. Like they traded the first rounder for Christian Dvorak, and he hasn't exactly panned out as a great pickup either. A lot of injuries last year, obviously not a great season. And you could hopefully would have liked to have seen him take another highly touted drafted player in the draft or something like that, and obviously made a good move of that way. But at the same time, things are completely overhauled in Montreal. We have a whole new regime. We have a whole new strategy in place. Things are going in a whole different direction. It's just fun sometimes to look back on deals that were discussed but never took place. Imagine Seth Jarvis in Montreal. Imagine Kotkaniemi in Carolina, but he is in Carolina. We don't really have to think of what that would be like because we know. But imagine if Seth Jarvis wasn't there and they would have actually made that trade. That would not have been good for Carolina, as much as I argue that it wasn't great to sign him to the offer sheet and they overpaid him. It still would have been worse had they given up Seth Jarvis. So let me know your thoughts on that whole scenario. Hopefully the offer sheet wars, so to speak, are over. And next time we see an offer sheet, it's hopefully sometime soon, because they can be, from a fan's perspective at least, interesting and entertaining. Hopefully we don't see the back and forth retaliation like we saw between the Habs and the Canes. Let me know your thoughts on everything discussed today down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.